How does the U.S. interpret this show of force that we're seeing right now?
Well, look, nations have to decide for themselves how they're going to look after military readiness, but we've been very clear now is not the time to be treating Russia in any kind of normal way, and certainly not in a way that they could glean improved military capabilities from that interaction, such as an exercise like this. We're mindful of the exercise. Obviously, we'll watch it as close as we can, but we're going to be focused on our own military readiness in the Indo-Pacific because our national security interests are so tied to so many other allies and partners in the region, partners who are worried about China's increasing aggressive and coercive behavior, partners who are worried about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So we're going to stay focused on our own military readiness.
Knowing that Iran is now providing drones to Russia for use in Ukraine, what do you make of this idea of China, Russia, and Iran as the new axis?
I don't think we're describing it in that way. Look, Russia realizes that it's been further isolated and ostracized as a result of what it's doing in Ukraine by so much of the international community. So they're turning to those few countries that they can turn to for assistance. Turning to Iran is indicative not just of how isolated they really have become, but how much Iran is isolating itself further from the international community by being willing to provide these kinds of capabilities to Russia. And look, we're concerned about those capabilities, of course. It's just further evidence that Putin wants to kill more Ukrainians, which is why we're going to stay focused on making sure that we're arming the Ukrainians with the kind of capabilities they need to beat back Russian offensives inside their own country.
India is also taking part in these exercises, as we mentioned, Admiral. It seems to be still sort of straddling the line on Russia's war with Ukraine. Yeah. They have put on hold plans to buy some weapons and cooperate militarily with Russia, but now we have them taking part in these exercises. Has the U.S. expressed disappointment with India's leaders for their taking part?
I certainly wouldn't talk about diplomatic discussions here on TV. Every nation has to make their own decisions. India's got to make its own decisions about its bilateral relations with other countries, and certainly countries that it's going to exercise militarily with. I would just say what I said before. We don't believe that this is a time for business as usual with Russia. We certainly don't believe it's a time for anybody to be helping them with their military capabilities.
Well, I know you've sent that message to China repeatedly here, and we understand trade between China and Russia has increased in value by about 30% this year. At what point will the U.S. start considering secondary sanctions, Admiral?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of any decisions by the president one way or the other. Look, China has a choice to make, and they can either choose to join the rest of the world in condemning what Russia is doing in Ukraine and not helping him continue to kill innocent Ukrainians going forward, or they can decide, to assist that effort. We hope that they'll make better decisions going forward. In the meantime, we're going to stay focused on making sure Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield, and that Mr. Putin continues to suffer severe costs and consequences for what he's done. And he has. His economy is in tatters. He is not able to, for instance, regenerate precision-guided munitions on the battlefield the way that he wanted to. And now he's forced to turn to Iran for unmanned aerial systems. So it's having an effect, this pressure that's being placed internationally on Mr. Putin. It's having an effect on him, and we're going to continue to raise those costs for Mr. Putin.
Admiral, we've heard from the Pentagon as many as 80,000 Russian casualties since the start of this war 6 months ago. Have those numbers been updated, and how would you describe the readiness of the Russian military as we head for winter?
The Russians have clearly suffered an enormous number of casualties. I don't have the exact figure today, and we're careful not to talk about those numbers too specifically because, frankly, it changes literally every day. But they have suffered an enormous amount of casualties, both killed and wounded. And we know that to be the fact because we also know that Mr. Putin is going to extraordinary lengths to try to recruit and retain soldiers for this fight, even to the point where he's turned into prisons, and he's up in the recruitment age, well into the 50s. So we know that he's having a manpower issue. He's also having, quite frankly, command and control issues on the ground, unit cohesion and morale, and battlefield performance issues in Ukraine by using this largely conscript force that doesn't have the same will to fight that the Ukrainians do, and certainly doesn't have the capabilities that they do.
We understand that UN nuclear inspectors have arrived at the nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. This is something that has been long in coming. I know that the U.S. wanted to see this happen. Should the U.S. also take part in setting up a demilitarized zone around that plant, Admiral?
The president's been clear we're not going to have U.S. boots involved in the U.S. troops, involved in the war in Ukraine. So I see no role for the United States in creating a demilitarized zone around that power plant. We do want there to be such a demilitarized zone around that plant. We don't want to see the plant be the scene of combat action. That should never be the case. It's the Russians who have militarized the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and we urge and call on them to demilitarize it as quickly as possible. Also, and I'm glad you pointed out that the inspectors are there. We're glad to see that. We hope that they're given unfettered access, and we look forward to their report about the safety and the operational efficiency of that nuclear power plant, because, again, the danger could be so much bigger, not just to the people of Ukraine, but even to the region. So it's important that those inspectors are given unfettered access, allowed to do their job, and to stay as long as they need to stay to be able to report back.
Does that plant need to stay online for the benefit of powering Ukraine? And if it does not, does the U.S. have spare capacity to help them through winter?
What we've said is that, given what we know about the fighting in and around the plant, that we support maintaining a controlled shutdown status, to limit the risk and the danger. But what we are worried about, of course, is that Mr. Putin will weaponize the energy that this power plant produces, as he has weaponized energy like oil and gas throughout the European continent. And of course, the risks and the dangers are so much greater when we're talking about a nuclear power plant. So we support a controlled shutdown status so that, again, those risks can be mitigated.
Understood. Admiral, I want to ask you quickly about what we've been seeing around Taiwan and news today that Taiwan, in fact, shot down a drone that was believed to be from China. It's described as a civilian drone, but we've seen over the past couple of days warning shots, these drones flying over islands that Taiwan claims to control here. Does the U.S. Navy, the U.S. military have a sense of where these drones are from and whether it's part of the Chinese military activity that we've seen increase lately?
Well, look, we support Taiwan's right and ability to defend itself. That's what the Taiwan Relations Act is all about. The United States will continue to help them defend themselves. Well, I'll let them speak to their operations and what they're doing or what they're not doing. But these reports are exactly what we've been talking about when we're talking about the risk of miscalculation and rising the risks of conflict. And nobody benefits from conflict in and around the Taiwan Strait. We have long said we don't want to see the status quo changed unilaterally, certainly not by force. And what you're seeing from the PRC is an effort to change the status quo by flying more over the median line, by flying unmanned aerial systems in and around Taiwan and around the Taiwan Strait and islands. I mean, this is about changing the status quo in the Chinese mind, and we're just going to, we find that unacceptable. We're not going to just abide by that. We're going to continue to make sure that Taiwan can defend itself.
And the U.S. will continue to sail through the Taiwan Strait. Is that going to happen again imminently, Admiral?
Well, I don't have any future operations to speak to. You saw we just did that last weekend with 2 U.S. Navy cruisers.
Yes.
We will continue to sail, operate, and fly where international law permits us to do that. The Taiwan Strait is international waters, so I certainly, without briefing a specific transit here in the future, I can tell you we're going to continue to operate where international law permits us to.